Hello everyone and welcome to, I believe this is called the Metroidvania Game Makers Roundtable. I am your host for this hour, Jeremy Parish. I am not a Metroidvania game maker, and despite rumors on the internet to the contrary, I did not make the word Metroidvania either. But I have spent a lot of time reading and writing about those games and playing them. And so we've gathered today some experts in the field, and by experts I mean people who have actually taken the time to create great Metroidvania games. So without further ado, I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Let's start at the far end with the special guest who flew in all the way from Japan to talk to us. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your past, your work.
シャドウラビリンスのプロデューサーの相沢聖吾です。バンダイナムコに入社して16年ぐらいになりますが、もともとプログラマーとしてやってまして、これまでにテイルズ・オブシリーズと、あとスマッシュブラザーズの 4-3DS Wii U の方をプログラマーとして携わっておりました。プロデューサーとしてはパックマン99の方を携わっておりました。
Hi, I'm Seigo Aizawa, the producer of Shadow Labyrinth. I have been with Bandai Namco for 16 years. When I was a programmer, I contributed to the Tales of series and Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U. Additionally, I am the producer of Pac-Man 99.
ゲーム大好きで、最近ヤーズライジングクリアしました。キャズムもプレイしたいんですけど、ちょっと英語わからないので、ぜひ日本語版を出してください。よろしくお願いします。今日はここに来られて光栄です。
I love playing games, obviously, and recently I completed Yars Rising and eagerly awaiting Japanese localized version of Chasm. I am very excited to be here, and thank you for having me today.
So, Aizawa-san, your past works include a character action game in Smash Bros., an RPG in Tales of Exilia, and also a Pac-Man game. Would you say that your work to this point has led you to create a Pac-Man Metroidvania?
はい、まさにその通りです。
Yes, all the previous titles are connecting the dots, and that's why the Shadow Labyrinth is here right now.
Excellent. So, moving next in line, please introduce yourself, sir.
Hello, my name is James Petruzzi, and I run the indie game studio BitKid. I served as designer and director on the procedurally generated platformer Chasm, and I'm now working on WOLFHOUND, a World War II inspired Metroidvania where I'm the designer, director, programmer, and writer.
So how would you say that your work in Xbox indie games kind of prepared you for this moment of being a Metroidvania creator?
It's just one step at a time, you know. We started with really simple kind of arcade-style games, single screen, and eventually worked on a 2D multiplayer platformer, and then somehow found myself making Metroidvanias, and it doesn't seem like I'll be escaping it anytime soon, hopefully.
And finally, the gentleman immediately to my left.
Hi, I'm James Montagna, director at WayForward, where I've been for 18 years now making games. I've been involved as an associate director on the Shantae series, working on Shantae Risky's Revenge, Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, Half Genie Hero, Seven Sirens. Recently, I collaborated with Nintendo as the director of Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp. And even more recently, I worked on a Metroidvania reimagining of the 1982 game Yars Revenge with Atari called Yars Rising, and that's what brings me here today.
So James, Shantae Risky's Revenge was kind of at the leading edge of the sort of modern Metroidvania resurgence. How would you say that creating a game like that has changed between Risky's Revenge and Yars Rising?
Well, you know, there's a lot more games that are exploring this genre now, thankfully. So there's just so many new ideas that are being brought in. It keeps us on our toes, and we have to think of like new ways to innovate for sure.
All right, so now that we've provided our bona fides, let's talk about Metroidvanias. What is a Metroidvania? For the purposes of this discussion, we're just going to say that they are really 2D action platform games that star a character who has to explore a world, gain new powers, overcome obstacles, find new ways to get around the world, and ultimately reach the ending. So with that kind of basic high-level explanation of what a Metroidvania is, let me ask, what do you think makes Metroidvania games unique from other genres? Aizawa-san.
そうですね、私にとってメトロイドバニアでユニークな点っていったらやっぱ探索と手に汗握るアクションだと思います。特に探索だと、広大なマップがあってそこを駆け巡っていて今まで行けなかったところだとかを、ダブルジャンプとかっていうスキルを入手してその後バックトラッキングしていけるっていうところが、メトロイドバニアかなと思います。
My definition of Metroidvania is a blend of exploration and thrilling action, particularly on the exploration aspect. I find it very cool when players backtrack to the early stages of the vast map and unlock new paths with skills obtained during their adventure.
メトロイドバニアあるあるなんですけれども、ゲームスタートの時に、高い壁とかがあって今はいけないなってところも、ゲーム中盤になってスキル入手して、立ち戻ってきた時に、そこから行けるようになってこう行き詰まった時に、一気に世界が広がるというか、そういったところを感じるとなんか私としてはすごくワクワクします。
For instance, you often encounter a tall wall that you cannot pass with your default skills. However, after defeating a few bosses and gaining new abilities, you can easily overcome the obstacles and open new paths. I always find this very satisfying and exciting.
Yeah, I actually have a question for Aizawa-san. This term Metroidvania in the West has become very popular to describe this genre of game. Is there a term like that in Japan? And has the term Metroidvania itself started to catch on?
よくメーカーとかは、2D 探索アクションっていう形で、このジャンルを言うんですけれども、ただ一般的なユーザーとしてはもうメトロイドバニアっていう風な、言葉っていうのが、一般的になっています。
So in Japan, the 2D action exploration game is the right term. However, the Metroidvania is a more dominant term to explain this genre.
So it's really catching on, isn't it? You know, it's funny, the term Metroidvania is actually a little bit problematic for us as developers, which was coined by Jeremy here. It's documented on the internet.
Don't believe the lie.
The term is like, it's Metroid and Castlevania, and of course, like Nintendo are some of our business partners, and we also working with Konami on things like Contra, and so we can't put the term Metroidvania on the back of the box because it feels like it's stamping on their intellectual properties. So we have to try to think of like other ways to like describe this genre officially. So it's funny, Aizawa-san mentions terms like exploration and action. With Yars Rising, we kind of have been using the genre term exploration action to more formally describe this style of game.
So I will jump in here to say that I think you can offer a good defense for using the term Metroidvania because it itself is a combination of words that are themselves combinations of other words. Metroid comes from metro, like subway, and android. And Castlevania comes from castle and Transylvania. So really, you go to the legal team and say that you're just breaking it down to its components and kind of bringing it all back together.
I think that'll hold up in court. Okay.
Let's see. I believe James, you have some thoughts on what makes you Metroidvanias unique.
Yeah. So I would say if you broke it down to the bare basics, it's essentially a maze game with gates that are blocking your way out, and the only way to overcome those gates is to gain new abilities. And I think a lot of games have keys, and they try to camouflage them so they don't always just seem like a key. Say you come down a hallway and there's a jet of steam blocking your way, and you have to find like a wheel to turn that off and get through. But the thing that separates the Metroidvania is that it's an active item in the world that's useful just beyond like a one-use kind of puzzle situation. And you know, if the game's designed well, you could use it in multiple kind of situations, from combat to platforming and anything else.
other James, do you actually have any thoughts on what makes Metroidvanias unique and not just problematic?
Nothing but trouble. I think the thing that makes a Metroidvania specifically unique is that sense that the world is so vast and it really rewards the player's curiosity, invites you to explore it. And there's a sort of permanence to the world where if you travel to one place, you know you can always go back to a place you came from, and sometimes you actually have to do that to progress. I really think that's like the core of a Metroidvania.
So let me put this other question to you. Does a Metroidvania have to be a 2D game? Can it be a 3D game? And I don't just mean graphics, I mean the world structure, the way you interact with it.
そうですね、私としては、グラフィックとしては、3D であってもいいと思うんですけれども、やっぱり横画面のスクロールっていうところが一つメトロイドバニアとしての特徴かなと思ってます。
I think 3D is okay, but then as I mentioned earlier, the Metroidvania characterization is that you move from one side to the other, from side to side. So as long as it's keeping that art direction, then I think 3D is fine as well.
I would agree with that. I think there could definitely be a 3D Metroidvania. I think probably all of us enjoy the 2D ones more, though. It's just kind of like a simplification of reality, and it is easier to display on a map and like kind of have an understanding of where things are in the world, and easier to remember the places that you'd like to go back to when you eventually have the capabilities.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You could have a 3D traversal Metroidvania, but I feel like there's a reason we don't see it so much. I could speak for myself in the sense that I have no sense of direction. If I don't have my car navigator, I'm doomed. I'm lost forever. So in a Metroidvania game, I can navigate around spatially. I've got the x-axis and the y-axis. The moment you introduce that z-axis, that's it. I'm just going to get lost. So I think there's a certain simplicity that comes with a 2D traversal, but it's not to say that you couldn't do it in 3D.
Are there any 3D games that jump out to you as making you say, like, yeah, okay, this is a Metroidvania?
I'm trying to think of a 3D game that. So you start to stretch the definition of a Metroidvania, don't you? I feel like if I answer this as no right answer, someone's gonna be like, "That's not a Metroidvania," and you're probably right in ways.
Well, then, fair enough. Let's actually turn back the hands of time and talk about just a little bit about the history of the Metroidvania genre and kind of its rise to popularity before we talk about your individual games. If you look back into the 1980s, the Metroidvania is almost as old as video games themselves. I would say games in this style started to really appear in the mid-80s, kind of on early Japanese computers and on the Famicom NES consoles. It had this moment of popularity through the late 80s and then kind of tapered off into the 90s. And for about 15 years or so, there weren't really that many Metroidvania games being created. And then all of a sudden, at the end of like the first decade of the century, like 2008, 2009, 2010, you started to see this kind of resurgence. And since then, they've never gone away. And actually, there are more coming out from both large developers and small indie teams each year. So looking back into the past, let me put this question to you. What do you think made this style of game catch on in the first place? Looking back to the pre-Metroidvania games, things like, just games on NES or, Wonder Boy 3 on Master System or something along those lines. Those kind of early efforts to create exploratory games before things had really codified.
Hey. メトロイドマニアっていうジャンルなんですけども、やっぱり当時のハードウェアの限られたリソースの中で、広大な世界っていうところを、プレイヤーに没入させようと思ってもなかなかハードウェアのリソースが限られていたっていうところもあったと思うんですね。なので、開発者が一つアイデアとしてバックトラッキングさせることによって、よりボリュームが増えて自由度を が増すっていうその体験っていうのを、ユーザーに与えるっていうことが非常に斬新であり受けたんじゃないかなと思います。
So back in the day, developers did their best to maximize the limited resource of the consoles to push the boundary of the creativity in the game. And as a result, I think that was the backtracking system of the Metroidvania genre, enabling players to immerse themselves in the expansive worlds of the vast map. And to me, this was, it was one of the most innovative and free form of game that was available at the time.
James?
Yeah, so I'd say the large interconnected worlds were really unique for the time. Typically, like from arcade games to early NES games, you were always locked into going like a single direction. And all of a sudden, you had to figure out where to go as well, and it became like a puzzle on top of an action game. And I think there's also something really unique about the viewpoint of a side-scrolling game. It's a bit reminiscent of like a dollhouse or a stage, and it's just more convincing of a living world than a lot of the other kind of viewpoints in video games at the time.
I guess I'll just add, my first Metroidvania-esque experience was a game on the Nintendo Entertainment System, Kid Icarus, which on Famicom was Palutena no Kagami. That game, you had the linear traversal, but there was these moments where you're in this underworld labyrinth and you're exploring room to room. And I think it was just so innovative for the time because you had these games in that era that were generally very linear, but now you had this sense of vastness as you were like exploring the catacombs, and you'd have to like backtrack and like take different paths and just kind of develop your spatial sense. And I just remember that was like a Blockbuster video rental for me, and then when I had to like return it and go back to like linear games, I like felt this like absence, and I like wanted to explore the world more. Like, in Mario, you scroll the camera, you can't go back. That world, it doesn't exist anymore once it leaves the screen. So I think that's, for lack of a better way to put it, what kind of planted a flag as Metroidvania as a genre and what makes it special back in the day.
So I mentioned that Metroidvania games kind of tapered off in the mid-90s, and we're really pretty much off the scene for 15 years, which is interesting because really kind of the two definitive landmark games, Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, came out during that period, but not a lot of other exploratory action platform games did come out. And it wasn't until, like I said, around 2010 or so, that the genre started to make a resurgence with Risky's Revenge and La Mulana and Shadow Complex and other games like that just kind of suddenly sprang out of nowhere. What do you think caused the resurgence of the Metroidvania? What do you think made people all of a sudden say, oh, this is actually good and we should be making games like this all the time?
最初に先ほどジェームスさんが言っていただいた鏡の大迷宮なんですけども、実はシャドウラビリンスの、ディレクターが、鏡の大迷宮を作ったディレクターなので、ぜひそのことを伝えたいと思います。
So actually, what James mentioned about the Kirby Amazing Mirrors, the director of the Shadow Labyrinth it's actually his game. So I'm gonna report to him that you played his game.
Oh, sugoi. Yeah, that one. Yeah, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. We were talking before the panel. That's one of my favorite Metroidvania games because it's got like multiplayer Metroidvania and you could fly around as Kirby. Like, that's like so cool. So yeah, I didn't know there was that connection, but now it's sprung it on me. It makes me even more interested in playing this game. I'm very excited.
まず再活性されたこのメトロイドマニアが再活性した理由っていうなんですけど、2つ考えられまして、1つがレベルデザインやアイデアが重要なジャンルで、少人数のチームでも開発可能なことだなと思ってます。で、特にコストのかかるグラフィックにおいて、2D グラフィックのようなスタイルでも受け入れられることがあると思います。
First, I have two reasons on why there's a spotlight back on the Metroidvania games right now. First, the genre's focus on innovative ideas and level design allows the development by the small teams. And additionally, when it comes to the 3D graphic, it costs a lot, but I've noticed that 2D pixel art is gaining appreciation among the younger generation, which naturally puts the spotlight back on the Metroidvania games.
でもう一つがメトロイドバニアの影響を受けた子どもたちが、成長して、ゲーム開発するスキルっていうのを、身につけで、開発環境の方も今アンリアルや、ユニティといった非常に便利なミドルウェアが登場し、Steam だとか Epic といった、気軽にリリースできるプラットフォームっていうのが充実してきたことが挙げられると思います。多分もうメトロイドバニアに限らずゲーム業界全体がそれによって活性化しているんじゃないかなと思ってます。
And secondly, the original generation that grew up with the genre now has the skills and experience to create their own games. This resurgence is undoubtedly supported by the accessibility of the powerful engines like Unity and Unreal, as well as the popularity of platforms like Steam and Epic.
James Petruzzi, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say as a developer, I just kind of miss the simplicity of older style games, and I think a lot of other people did too. And not only that, but just having a heavy focus on exploration and learning some deep mechanics, whereas AAA games at the time were kind of forcing you into these like on-rails experiences that didn't allow you to get lost, and they were just overstuffed with like really shallow mechanics, just to kind of waste your time. And yeah, that's at least where my love for them came from.
When I consider the question of what led to the resurgence of Metroidvania, I think it's important to consider what made them go away. And it has a lot to do with the progression of technology moving out of the 2D game era. There was an inclination for games to go in the direction of being 3D. And as we covered earlier in this talk, the 3D games don't always lend themselves naturally to this style of game. So I think that's when you started to see this lull or dip in this genre of game being explored. And there was also, I think, a sense for publishers at the time that 2D was old. It was the old way of doing things, and 3D was new, and there was just this kind of feeling that maybe even pixel art felt old. We just came from that, so we want to move forward with something different. And that's probably why we weren't seeing it for a while. But as we moved ahead, we had consoles like the Game Boy Advance and the DS, and there was things that were supporting more 2D art, 2D pixel art gameplay, and it's still a viable and fun genre of game. And I know at WayForward, like, we grew up playing these kinds of games. We missed playing those kind of games, and so with things like Shantae Risky's Revenge, we wanted to bring back the experience that we had with the games that we grew up with and loved, and be able to put our own spin on them and share them with people.
So let me bring the question of history around to your own individual works. And James Montagna, you already kind of answered this question a little bit, but what was your first Metroidvania experience that really made you kind of take notice of the style of game? And what was the aha moment with that game that made you say, like, I love this. This is really interesting, and I want to play games like this?
Yeah, of course. As I mentioned, Kid Icarus. Kirby Superstar on the Super Nintendo actually had a mode that's called Great Cave Offensive, which is like a really amazing game. Seriously, it still holds up. It's one of my favorites. That was like a proto like Metroidvania exploration, and so ultimately that led to Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, where you have this exploration where Kirby can fly around. So you're not just like confined to like traveling room. You can fly up and around, and you can find abilities. And then once you have an ability, you have to think about where you can go back and bring it and use it. So that's like your key, and now you're gonna bring it across the map with you. And just this sense of vastness and openness, it's just one of the things that just makes it so special. And to this day, I go back and play that every time I get new ideas for new Metroidvania games that I want to make in the future. So yeah, that's my experience for sure.
Aizawa-san, what was your first Metroidvania experience, and what about it sparked your creativity and your imagination?
皆さん知ってるかはわからないんですけれども、日本ファルコムが開発してナムコが発売した「ドラゴンスレイヤー4」というゲームが、私が初めてプレイした、メトロイドバニアのゲームって今言えばそうなのかなと思うゲームです。
My first encounter with the genre was Namco's Dragon Slayer 4. I'm not sure if everyone knows about this game. A
It was
friend of mine.
Legacy of the Wizard in America.
アメリカではすごく人気なゲームですと。
このゲーム私すごい好きだったのもすごいびっくりしたのが キャラクターを切り替えて例えば力の強いお父さんだったら岩をどけて、ジャンプ力の高いお兄さんが、そのどけた岩の先のところをキャラクター切り替えて先に進むっていうのがまさにパズルのような、要素で、私はすごい楽しかったです。
And what I like about this game was that it was very innovative in a way that it introduced me to the concept of having multiple player characters, each with the different skills. For example, the father was able to move a rock, and then the brother was able to jump high. Like all these different skills that each player had was very new to me.
James Petruzzi?
So for me, it was the original NES Metroid. I'd gone over to my neighbor's house and to play, and he had just gotten back from the mall with this shiny new package, and yeah, we booted that game up, and I don't know. It was just that I think the thing that was most striking about it was the tone of it, because it was completely unlike anything else I had played at the time. It just has this like atmospheric music, the deliberate pace, these like dark graphics, and I don't know. As a young kid, it was just like wow. It just had a very oppressive feel to it, and the game was hard too. On top of that, so it was nothing that held your hand in the slightest. And I think as a kid, it was maybe even too hard for me, but it was something that definitely stuck with me.
Yeah, I know for myself also, Metroid was not just the first Metroidvania game I played, but it was the first game I bought for my NES. So once I figured it out, to me that was just kind of the baseline of video games. That's how video games should always be. So I always gravitated toward this style of game. So it's good to know there's others like me out there. What would you say is your favorite Metroidvania game of all time? And bringing that into your career, how has that game specifically influenced your work?
そうですね、私が好きなメトロイドバニアのタイトルって言ったらやっぱり1番っていうよりは2つあるんですけども、ホローナイトとエンダーリリーズです。で両方とも絶望的な世界観だとか、ノスタルジックな音楽とかっていうところがすごい、感動しました。
The two games, I can't pick one, that significantly influenced this project is Ender Lilies and Hollow Knight. I was deeply moved by the horrific world and the nostalgic music of Ender Lilies, and they both shared a very dark and immersive world. And these titles provided me with a great inspiration on how to incorporate Pac-Man into the dark concept like never before in the Shadow Labyrinth.
あとメトロイドバニアのその両方のタイトルともメトロイドバニアの基本要素である、しっかりとしたレベルデザインだとか、あとはその深い世界観を構築する方法っていうのを結構学びました。でナムコの SF 作品には、ディグダグだとかポスコニアンといった、いろいろなゲームの、ナムコ SF ゲームの中に共通した UGSF という、共通の世界観があるんですけれども、そういったものを、シャドウラビリンスの方でも取り入れるってところを、取り入れて、より深みのある世界観を構築するってところに、役立てました。
And they also additionally reminded me of a key factor of the Metroidvania genre, which is to having a well-designed level and a deep world that you can thoroughly explore. At Namco, there are several sci-fi titles within the universe called the UGSF. This includes games such as Bosconi and Dig Dug and other works. And by incorporating Shadow Labyrinth into the UGSF world, I was able to add more depth into the game's universe.
So Aizawa-san, you mentioned that you've been playing video games for a long time, all the way back to Famicom. But the two games that you cited as your favorite Metroidvanias are actually much newer. Ender Lilies and Hollow Knight are from the past few years. What is it about those two games that really especially appeal to you over some of the older games?
そうですね、特にホローナイトっていうのは、よりすごく難しいゲームなんですけれども、よく死ぬんですけれども、その死んだ後やっぱり何度も何度もリトライをしたくなる。でリトライをしていくうちにどんどん上手くなっていくっていうところがすごく中毒性があるというか特にホローナイト自分初めてプレイした時にトゲがいっぱいあるステージで、まさか敵を下に攻撃して渡っていくなんてそんなクレイジーなことがあるのかって思ったら、実際そういう攻略法だった時に、いっぱい死んだんですけど、それができるようになった時になんていうんですかね、次にもどんどん敵を下に踏み台にすることが癖になってたっていうところが非常に私としてはホローナイト面白いところだなと思いました。
Yeah, so I know it's a recent game, but it does test the boundary of creativity, and that's what I like about it. I really love Hollow Knight. It's incredibly challenging, and I've died countless times, but I enjoy how through the repeated attempts, you gradually become better at it. When I played for the first time, I thought it was wild that you had to use the enemy as a literal stepping stone to cross the dungeon. However, as I continued playing, I got used to the controls, and I found myself enjoying the act of stepping on them.
All right. James Petruzzi, let me put that question to you. What's your favorite Metroidvania game, and how has that influenced your work?
So when I was in college, I played this little game called Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and yeah. I would say it ended up being life-changing in a way, eventually, but that game just has a unique blend of gameplay, world, and music that all combine for this perfect flow state for the player. But I think the thing that also makes it really interesting is that there's so much about the game that's very deliberate. Everything from changing your equipment to navigating around the world to key points you want to get to. None of it holds your hand, and it never explains itself, and it's never overly convenient. So it feels like you really have to study and understand the game in order to beat it, and you're not just kind of on this Rails experience where you're constantly led to the answer that you're looking for.
I like that word you used, deliberate, because I feel like that's one of the sort of inherent trademarks of the Castlevania series that some of the later Metroidvania games kind of lost sight of. I mean, if you look back at the original Castlevania, everything is so meticulous and so specific, and you have to really be careful about how you play. And Symphony of the Night is a much more fluid, much more, I would say, expressive game in a lot of ways, and gives you so many options as to how to play. But Alucard, the protagonist, still feels he's got a weight to him, and there's a lot of, we were talking about this earlier, little things like canceling your attacks by striking right before you jump or right before you land and things like that, that really kind of draw you in and make the game feel like they put a lot of thought into the way it moves and the way it plays.
Absolutely, and I think even playing it today, it still holds up beautifully. I don't think, like I said, there is some things deliberate about it that I think modern players would just be like, wait, it doesn't have a map on the screen or auto map or give me a key point to go to or all these kind of things. But I think that's also kind of what makes the game and gives it its charm at the same time.
And James Montagna, what about you?
Gosh, okay. I think this game, I played it at a 1.0 English patch. It was just getting kind of some buzz on the indie game source web forums, and I was like, okay, I gotta check this out. The game is Cave Story. Oh my. This crowd is legit. Cave Story just left such an impression on me. And I think a lot of it had to do with the charm of the characters. I'm playing through, exploring this world, and the first thing I see is okay, wow, that's a cute villainous character. Where did she go? Okay, I want to explore more of the world to go find, interact with the characters more. The first boss is what is this, a giant toaster? What is this guy even? I love him. So I want to keep playing and get more interactions with these characters. And so I think the influence that I take away from games like Cave Story is the narrative kind of being drip-fed and being a reward as we progress through the game.
So yeah, the characters in Cave Story are really great, and that's something that I feel you've tried to bring into Yars Rising. But there is a balance to be struck. Have you found that to be challenging? If you have too much story, then it really grinds the experience to a halt. But if you don't have enough, then you don't really have that connection with the characters that I think is so essential to that kind of work.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, there's times where we have to prune some dialogue lines because you don't want to take control away from the player too long where they're just kind of thumbing A button, A button, A button through a lot of dialogue. And so we have a couple of different ways to balance that out and approach that. One way is, we keep our dialogue moments succinct. Something we like to do is passive dialogue where the characters can kind of talk while you play. That's one approach we occasionally like to take. Emi Kimura in Yars Rising never shuts up, and I love her for that. But there's also the environmental storytelling is a term that we use, where you'll have the set dressing kind of helping tell the story. So as you descend in Yars Rising in the Kotek office building, you start to see this like underground laboratory, and that is like one way we can also kind of tell the story. And then just using the stories as what we might refer to as like an interstitial moment, or the reward for the player for making progress. And so we space it out. You get a bunch of Metroidvania exploration gameplay, and your reward is the character that you saw and maybe felt endeared to. You get to interact with them again as you find where they are in the world.
So I'd like to talk a little more about each of the games that you've recently worked on. And James, let's jump off of what you just said as a kind of deeper dive into Yars Rising. Specifically, how do you take a single screen Atari 2600 game from 40 years ago and come up with the idea of saying, oh, well, this should be a Metroidvania? Like what's the sort of the logical step from A to B there?
You know, Atari was like super cool as a partner. They were really open to how we wanted to explore this. So in the case of Yars Rising, we have this 1982 Atari 2600 smash hit game, beloved by many people, Yars Revenge. And I guess you could say Yars Rising is the game that bravely answers the question, what if that game had an anime girl in a maze to run around in? A question I assure you no one was asking. I think for us, it was just a matter of, we knew kind of a story we wanted to tell. We looked at the classic gameplay of Yars Revenge, and we love it. And we want to share this with more people, this game that, you know, a lot of us grew up with. And the things that we love about it, it's got like these psychedelic visuals, this droning audio. And we thought about how to turn that into something unique, and the sensation of like, in that game you have to fly your Yar around and nibble through a barrier. It felt like the sensation of hacking, and so we incorporated that into our story, and we started building this narrative around it, and we realized a way that we can deliver this story was actually through this genre of game, and I think it kind of started to take shape around that core.
So looking even beyond just, you know, the gameplay mechanics of Yars Rising, the reality is Yars Revenge, there wasn't much narrative there, so you had to extrapolate a lot. How much of the lore, how much lore was there for an Atari 2600 game, and how did you expand that in a, I would say, a consistent way that, you know, felt like it had integrity to the original source?
Oh gosh, you know, there was a surprising amount of story behind this. In fact, Yars Revenge was one of the first games with a really in-depth lore behind it. And the way they did this was they actually packed a comic book inside of the box of the game to tell the backstory. And you would like read that first, go play the game, and in your imagination, now you have like this whole like background. Really brilliant for its time. And so before we set out to make this game, my objective was to become like just super obsessed with this thing. And because I know there's going to be people that just dearly love the original Yars Revenge, and we don't want to let them down. And then there's going to be the people that have maybe never heard of it, and we want to show them what's cool about it because they weren't born when the game came out, for instance. So it's a really interesting task to do this deep dive research. I played every game that was adjacent to Yars Revenge. I listened to the 1982 vinyl record. We incorporated the music from that into the game. I just became an uber geek about this thing, and we incorporated and tried to honor it in every way possible. And I guess I'll just kind of finish my thought. When you try to reimagine something that's very near and dear to a lot of people, there's a lot of pressure that's on. So I guess I'll mention, when I look at something like Shadow Labyrinth, I'm really impressed by this reimagining, because there's gonna be people that look at like Pac-Man, and for them, it's a really sacred character. And maybe they had a Pac-Man birthday cake when they were 10, and were Pac-Man for Halloween, and maybe they're like, that's not my Pac-Man, what is this? And maybe that person is me at first. So, when I first saw this reimagining of Pac-Man, I'm like, is this really okay? I was in the audience at the Game Awards, and I just gasped. And then after I got over my initial shock, I was like, wow, this is actually really taking one of my favorite genres of the game, Metroidvania, and my favorite character of all time, Pac-Man, together. And it's like this epic wrapper, and I was immediately on board and excited for this thing. And then I felt really like I could relate to the developer because, like, wow, you have to reimagine this thing that so many people hold sacred. It's not an easy task, and so I just feel similarly with what I had to do with Yars Rising. I could understand what goes into doing something like this, and it's no easy feat. It takes a lot of effort, but I really respect it.
ありがとうございます。そうですね、確かにパックマンを、ダークにするっていうのは非常に社内でも当初はすごく反発もあったんですけれども、やっぱりこうパックマン45周年を迎えていろんな人にプレイしていただきたいっていう思いがあったので、まずクールでダークなっていう、今までやったことのない視点っていうところをチャレンジしたいんだって会社にも強く訴えかけた形で、実現しました。
Yes, so to your point, internally at Bandai too, there were many people that was against Pac-Man's dark concept. However, Pac-Man reaching its 45th anniversary, I thought it was the time for a new idea, and that was when I pitched the dark Pac-Man concept, and I fought strong for it, and I'm really happy that the Shadow Labyrinth is coming to life.
So Aizawa-san, I want to ask you more about Shadow Labyrinth soon, but I do want to follow up with James first. How many people have come to you, James Montagna, and said, "That's not my Yars"?
Oh my gosh, immediately. Like, people, all the old school Atari heads, like, what is this game, anime, girl garbage? And I'm like, give it a shot. And you know what? It was really a win the moment that those people actually got the chance to play the game and saw the amount of reverence we hold for the classic game and the amount of love that we poured into it and all the different references. The moment like people saw like the Atari hotel in the background, they flipped out and were like super excited. So I think you have a game like this that kind of has the initial shock value that it's something new and different. It's exploring the thing you love in a new way. And then once you get past that, you see, oh, it really is in a lot of ways authentically inspired, and they'll feel the love that was put into it. So we did get a lot of that, but ultimately I think we were able to win over a lot of them, and I'll consider that a victory.
So you had to win over fans of Yars Revenge, but have you created fans of Yars Revenge through Yars Rising? Do you know?
That's the best thing. We had a couple journalists come up to it in events and be like, I wasn't born when this game came out, but I learned how to play it in your game, Yars Rising, and then I went and dusted off my parents' Atari 2600, and I was like immediately able to play it, and now I love this thing. That's like the best feeling.
So James Petruzzi, let me ask you, your game, Chasm, and its follow-up, WOLFHOUND, those don't have any existing lore or franchises to work off of. You had basically a blank slate. So what's the challenge there when you're just coming from zero and creating a game?
Well, in the case of Chasm, it was a long, winding road. It actually started as a mining game, I would say closest to Terraria. And eventually I just decided like I didn't really enjoy the mining aspect of it, and I had started kind of stamping out rooms in the terrain to like kind of create dungeons and put enemies in them. And the more I got drawn into the combat and kind of focused more on that, the more I was like, okay, maybe I should just scrap all the mining and focus on a traditional Metroidvania. So I started making kind of screen-based rooms and tying them together and trying to focus more and more on the combat. And that's kind of just where the game came from,
But at the same time, you kind of made things more difficult for yourself with the randomization of the game. I mean, you could have just made, Chasm as like a tribute to Symphony of the Night and had, that would have been a game. But you went this extra step. But I feel like that might have been, kind of making things more difficult for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about how the randomization of Chasm works and, what were the side effects of that in development terms?
Yeah, sure. So the earlier versions of the procedural generation was basically, just make a bunch of different rooms and shapes and the generator would grab from all those rooms and try to assemble them together into something. But we learned pretty quickly, true random doesn't even feel random, because you get like this like clustering effect. So you'd get like several rooms in a row that were like almost all identical. And one of the common rooms in Metroidvania games are those tall, skinny rooms that are basically just meant for changing like what level on the y-axis you're on. But we'd like get a bunch of those like jammed together, and there would just be like kind of no flow to it. So actually, that's when I kind of really started studying Symphony of the Night, and I was like going through the first castle over and over, just kind of studying it, and I realized you're kind of tricked in that game. Like in the first half of the game, or the first 100%, it's essentially walking across the castle 3 times, like back and forth, and you're kind of seeing like routes you'll eventually be able to go, but it's more just kind of a straightforward, almost side scroller. And so we kind of looked at that and scrapped what we had and changed it to work more with using key points. So we'd be like, okay, we have a point here and a point here. Let's generate a series of hallways between them where we could have these combat encounters and try to replicate that feel of Symphony of the Night. Obviously, though, I don't think it turned out nearly as good from a level design aspect, just because of all the limitations we faced and the difficulties of trying to achieve something like that. It's just very hard to work in, different paths from different areas and things like that. So we kind of had to, cheat a little bit. Like each area is kind of like on its own map, because just getting one area to generate and not have rooms overlap each other and make a big mess was hard enough. So it was like, okay, we'll have kind of warp points, to take you to different sections and this and that. So with WOLFHOUND, yeah, I'm very happy to be able to just hand design it and, kind of just make what I want and not worry so much about the technology side and constantly battling algorithms and, randomness.
So without spoiling too much about a game that hasn't been released yet, how would you say that WOLFHOUND is a reaction to, your experience with Chasm? Like, what have you learned from creating Chasm and said, I'm not going to do that again with WOLFHOUND?
There's numerous things. Obviously, the procedural generation was a big one. So I am focusing more on like very interconnected areas, and the whole world is going to be on one single 2D map, where it's just kind of all in one screen, no breaks, no loading screens, plenty of, secrets and cutbacks and things like that. And then also on the story side, that was like the first big story I wrote. Like all of our games before that were either kind of like arcadey or multiplayer games where, the story is just like a single line. So, that was like really jumping in the deep end of the pool there, like trying to learn storytelling and like studying the hero's journey and trying to figure all those things out. But I still think we made a lot of mistakes with it. Like, we were like, oh, wouldn't it be mind-blowing if you didn't even know who the bad guy was until you got to the end? And it's like, no, not really. Like, you're kind of going through the whole game with like no impetus to like push you forward, and have this like kind of antagonist swing against you. So that's something I've definitely tried to correct with WOLFHOUND. You meet the big bad guy within the first quarter of the game, and hopefully you'll hate him, So, also, just characters themselves. I tried to. I've always been a big Zelda fan, and I like the kind of silent protagonist thing that they had with that, and I tried to replicate that with Chasm, and I don't think we quite hit the mark, because the thing I realized afterwards is you need like really colorful characters to kind of bring that up if your character is not going to talk. And so I'm going to make sure that the hero has plenty to say about the situation he's in WOLFHOUND.
So one last question for you. Going back to the word that you used earlier, deliberate, about Symphony of the Night, I feel like the thing that really made me love Chasm was the fact that it was the first non-Castlevania game that really captured the feel of Alucard in Symphony of the Night. It really had that sense of grace and solidity and momentum. Like there was just that, deliberate quality to his movement. And I'm kind of surprised in WOLFHOUND that you've managed to carry that over, but in a game that is basically being Metroid, as opposed to Castlevania. So what's the challenge there of making, a Samus-inspired exploration adventure still feel like it's kind of got Alucard at the center?
Yeah, so I would say like the single thing I was like looking back to for WOLFHOUND was my very first Metroidvania, the original NES Metroid. And I really wanted to study that game and like understand what made it tick. And you know, like once you start looking closely at it and you're thinking about like combat encounters and all those kind of things, you do realize it has this like very deliberate quality to it. Like the character moves slowly, the gun has a very short range, you know, so it's like you need to get close to enemies. You kind of need to plan how you want to do things, whereas like something with like Contra, you know, things are just flying at you and you're kind of just staying back at the edge of the screen and taking them out before they become a real threat to you. So that was something I looked at a lot for WOLFHOUND. And when we did the reveal trailer last year, a lot of people immediately called it a Contravania. And I was like, no, this is a Metroidvania. Like, that was the inspiration, was Metroid. Because WOLFHOUND has that same kind of mechanic where it's almost like a melee-type weapon range, like, but with shooting, you know? Now, obviously, as you go through the game, you get bigger and bigger weapons, and, you know, they increase your range and all that, just to make you feel like you're growing as a player, and the enemies can get harder and harder. But, yeah, that's kind of where it came from.
And finally, I have some questions for you, Aizawa-san. You mentioned that there's some resistance, you know, internally to the idea of a dark Pac-Man. But why did you decide to go that direction for Shadow Labyrinth? What was the purpose and inspiration there?
そうですね、まず今までやってこなかったっていう、今までやっぱりキュートでポップで、ヒーロー的なパックマンっていうところをずっとやってきたんですけれども、ちょっとそれだけでは、今まで触ってこなかった人たちが、なんていうんですか、パックマンに触れてこないっていうところもあったので、一つ趣向をこらえて今までやってこなかったクールでダークでっていうところで、パックマンを作ろうとなりました。でまずその前提の上で、パックマンってやっぱり迷路っていうのが大きな要素なので、この迷路っていう要素とメトロイドバニアっていうジャンルが非常にこうマッチするっていうところと、あとダークな雰囲気とメトロイドバニアもマッチするというところで、私はちょっとこのシャドウラビリンスというゲームを、作りました。
So as you know, Pac-Man, everyone knows it as a cute pop hero, and it's very iconic. So obviously, it was very difficult for me to pitch the dark concept. However, when I thought about how the Pac-Man could grow to the new audience, it was definitely to give out the new concept, the new face of the Pac-Man, and that was when I thought about the dark Pac-Man concept. And when I really looked deep into the IPs that we created, I thought the Pac-Man could be characterized as, you know, it's a maze game. When I thought about the maze, that was a perfect fit with the Metroidvania genre. So that's why I thought the Dark Pac-Man concept, as long as we include that maze concept, it would be a perfect match.
So the inspiration for Shadow Labyrinth is taking the Pac-Man single-screen maze and turning it into a massive maze for players to explore.
そうですね、大きな迷路っていうところもインスピレーションにして、そこからちょっとインスピレーションを膨らませて、食べるっていう要素、パックマンって3つ大きな要素があって、迷路と食べるっていうところと逆転っていう要素があるんですけれども、これらを全部、取り込んだら面白いものができるんじゃないかっていうところで、このゲームを作りました。
Yes, you're right. So it is like expanding the maze concept, but I believe I was able to, you know, also introduce the Pac-Man's eating and you know, the running the maze and turning the table concept to this game, the Shadow Labyrinth. So I hope people liked my game as well.
So was the idea of going dark with Pac-Man there from the very beginning? Because, you know, Pac-Man has a long legacy as a platform action hero. Pac-Land was one of the first platform games ever, really. Did you think, you know, at the beginning, like maybe we should make Pac-Land but as a Metroidvania, or was it always, you know, kind of going in this other direction, dark as opposed to cute?
そうですね、ダークっていうコンセプトは、もうかなり初期からありました。でそこをベースに、メトロイドバニアとしてまず絶対的に完成させるっていうところがありつつ、さらにパックマンのファンたちも、満足するようなもの、これはもう全然パックマンのゲーム、今までのパックマンのゲームとは違うものの、ちゃんとプレイしたら、あ、これはパックマンだねって感じられるようなところに落とし込みました。
Yeah, so the Dark Pac-Man concept was from the initial phase. However, we wanted to make sure that the classic Pac-Man fans would also love the game. So when we were designing the game, we made sure that, you know, all these Pac-Man iconic characteristics would be included in the game as well.
But it's interesting to me that you don't play as Pac-Man in this game. You play as sort of an unknown knight with a sword, and Pac-Man is more of a companion character. How did you arrive at that point? I mean, it's not unheard of for Pac-Man to be sort of an assistant character. I mean, you had the little guys in Baraduke, and you had, the Bacteria and Mr. Driller Ace, and so on and so forth. But, making that sort of front and center, the core of the game, I feel is actually very bold and a little risky.
Eh, 実はすごく初期の、デザイン案では主人公の剣士って頭がパックマンで体が剣士っていう人間っていう、デザインが実はありました。
So actually, to tell you the truth, in the initial phase, the swordsman's face was actually a Pac-Man head, and it had a swords knight. But when we were designing, it was not giving out that serious vibe, so we decided to change it.
ただやっぱり皆さん今笑われたようにちょっとファニーというか面白い感じになっちゃったので、やっぱり雰囲気と合わないので、今剣士がもやっとした黒い顔になっているのはプレイヤーの皆さんが自己投影ができるような、感じで、ああいうデザインにしています。でパックは、ミステリアスな存在で、やっぱりそのプレイヤーを導く存在っていうところで、あのような、キャラクター設定としております。
Yeah, so as the audience laughed, it just gives out too much of a funny vibe. So that's why we redesigned the swordsman to have a little bit of a blurred face, so that the players can almost feel like they're actually, the first character of the game. And Pac-Man is almost like a sidekick that is leading you in the dungeon.
So in a lot of ways, Shadow Labyrinth feels like a game made specifically for me. The first game I ever played was Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man. I love the Metroidvania genre, and also it ties in with the USGF timeline, and people who know me know that I'm a big proponent of Xevious being the sort of the centerpiece of the video game universe. So as my final question, what's the connection there with the USGF? How did that come to be?
まず UGSF の世界観上に UGSF のホームページとかにも、もうすでにシャドウラビリンスは載っているんですけれども、 UGSF の世界観上に、パックマンが存在していて、パックマンの中には、ディグダグの敵キャラとかも出てくるんですけど、単純にゲストとして出てくるというよりはちゃんと世界観上の設定にのっとって出てくるというところが、しっかりと、設定として盛り込んでおります。
Yes, so as you called out, the UGSF universe is included in this game. It is a big influence as well. But what we wanted to make sure was that the characters were not just there as a guest, but as a part of the universe, and it has a meaning to the why it's there. So you would see characters like from Digdag and Bosconian and other works from the UGSF universe.
ディグダグ、ボスコニアンってもうすでに明かしているんですけど、それ以外にもいろいろと隠し要素があるので、ぜひ皆さんプレイして、探していただけたらと思います。
So there's a lot of hidden secrets in the game, so I want the players to really play the game and find out all the secrets that are hidden in this game.
And I understand that you have a clip to show us of the game that hasn't been previously revealed before. So if you would like to play that now, that'd be great.
はい、会場の皆さんに今回限定で初出しというところで映像を用意しておりますので、ぜひご覧ください。
Yes, we have a special clip just for you in this audience, so please take a look at this.
now. So thank you, James and Aizawa-san, all for sharing your thoughts on creating Metroidvania games. And before you go, there is one last point of attention to check out on the screen. Thanks everyone for coming. I believe you check under your chair and you might have won a prize. If you did win a prize, that guy over there in the corner in the Shadow Labyrinth shirt, he's the one you talk to. But other than that, you're free to go. Thanks everyone for attending. Great having you here. Hope you enjoyed it.